Okay, great. So with what's happening in, you want to change the,
Yeah, it's
oh, with what's happening there in Venezuela, the first question is like, who's in control, right? Is it us? Is it them? The vice president says that she's in control and things like that. Trump says it's another thing, based on the elections of a decade ago. There should be somebody else that's the president shouldn't have been the girl in the first place. Who has the legitimate right to rule in Venezuela right now? Many of us gave our lives to Jesus years ago, and we gave him the throne in our lives. But slowly over time, we claw back the authority and claw back our position, so we end up sitting back on those thrones again, right? So Advent is one of the 6 seasons of the Christian calendar, begins the Christian year. It's a movable feast, which means the dates aren't always the same, because it's January, or it's based on the 4 Sundays previous to December 25th, which is always Christmas Day. So the 4 Sundays, that means it shifts. So it's a movable feast from there. And that season is to wait for, we're waiting for Jesus. But the season of Christmas doesn't actually start until Christmas Day. And it is 2 feasts that are included over a period of 12 days and ends on January 6th, which is Epiphany, which is in 2 days. So we are now in Christmas. It drives me crazy when I see Christmas trees out on the curb already. And it's like, I was talking to a lady at Home Depot. I went to Home Depot and I was checking out some stuff. And I said, Merry Christmas. And she goes, no, that was a couple days ago. I said, no, it's still Christmas. And she goes, no, Christmas ended on the 24th. And I said, no, do you know the song, The Day, 12 Days of Christmas? She said, yeah. And I said, that's the first day of Christmas. And she said, and I said, it goes for 12 days. So it ends on January 6th. And she goes, oh, I took down my trees on my Christmas tree on the 24th because my decorations on the 24th because the rain was coming. And I said, well, Merry Christmas. And she was very confused. She didn't know what to say. But I think that's especially if you say Merry Christmas to someone right now, they would be confused about it. But I think it's one of those things as Christians that we need to reclaim. This is a time for us that it's not something that's over and done and you throw it in the garbage and then we're on to the Happy New Year. This is a season for us to contemplate the gift of Jesus. And I specifically want to talk about this one because the wise men were not at. That's why that first song, the video, bothered me because it showed the wise men going to the manger. They were not at the manger. They didn't show up at the manger. We'll talk about why later as we go on. But they showed up in the calendar 12 days later. It's the day of Epiphany. And that's an important day for us as well, because that's the day that Jesus was presented to the world, and the wise men are representative of the world. Yes.
Historically, didn't they show up like a year later?
We'll talk about that. But we're talking about the 12 days because in our
Rated 12 days later.
the Christian calendar takes the life of Jesus and compresses it into a year.
Oh.
And so when you go through the calendar, by the time you get around to the other side, you start again with the birth, and that's the Christian calendar. So we've already done the waiting, the prophecy. Those are the first 4 weeks before, and now we're doing the birth of Jesus, and then we're going to get into Lent and Passion and those things. So yes, it's 12 days, but it wasn't 12 days before they showed up. It was a period of time, probably more like 2 years. But we're compressing the whole life of Jesus in a year. Okay, is that helpful? Good. Thanks for asking.
Helpful.
Thanks for asking the question, because I clearly didn't know to explain it that way. So good. All right. So it's often called Christmas tide because it's a season. Tide like Advent tide. We'll have Pentecost tide. It's an old world way of saying season. So it's a season. And it's not just one day. It includes 2 feasts. Most seasons don't have 2 feasts in it, but this has 2 feasts in it. And it's different than Advent. Advent is about waiting. It's about prophecy, but it's about the second coming of Jesus. And we're waiting for Jesus to come back again the way people waited for Jesus to be born in the first one. And that's what that season's all about. He's here. God became flesh. So it's a very different season for us to celebrate. And it's important to have those distinctions because it helps us to kind of sit in our theology a little bit and soak in it for a little bit before we get on to it. It is the season that celebrates the incarnation of Jesus, God becoming flesh, Emmanuel, God with us. And incarnation reminds us that Christ needs to continue to be incarnated in us every day, not just historically, but in us. He needs to be born in us every day. We need, as he was born with our nature, we need his nature to be born within us. So we gather today, the second Sunday of the feast of Epiphany. Epiphany means it's a manifestation or revelation. When you have an epiphany, you have a revelation. And the epiphany is the revelation of Jesus to the nations and represented in the wise men. Now, I also believe that that's core theology. We'll see that in just a little bit as well. But it is the way that it is celebrated in the church calendar. Also called Three Kings Day because the kings come by. We don't know if there was three kings that were there. There was three gifts. But does that mean there was only three kings? We don't know that as well. It is their arrival to see Jesus and their presentation of the Messiah to the world, represented by them. So let's talk about the Magi. Matthew chapter 2. If you have your Bibles, I'd encourage you to have either a paper or digital version available to read along on your own. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who was born the king of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Was it a real star? The star that, verse 9 says, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it rested over the place where the child was. That's not a physical star, maybe a spiritual star, but their journey was inspired by something they saw in the heavens. So there's a combination of stars, both real and supernatural, that happens here. At some point, it led them from the east, and they understood that to be fulfillment of the prophecies. We don't know how that works. It's a good thing because that would have, if he would have described how that works, it would have given us a formula for reading the stars. And we don't do that. And so that's why it's good that God didn't prescribe that as a way of understanding it. However, there also had to be another supernatural way that star, almost like Tinkerbell, kind of came out of the heavens and led them to the house. I mean, how does a star in the heavens lead you? It can, I get that it can lead you to a geography, but to lead you to a specific house that they're in, I think that's, so all of that's in there, and all that's the mystery what's in there. And again, I'm grateful that we don't have the astrological signs that showed them how to get there, because then we'd be all paying attention to our horoscopes and stuff like that now, because that's the way humans like to work. So I think it's a combination. But the Magi were stargazers. They were from Babylon. Babylon at the time of Jesus, this part of the world was ruled by two big empires, the Roman Empire, but as soon as we got past there, the green section over there is called the Parthian Empire. Parthian Empire is in what today is Iran and Iraq. And the Magi were by the way, in the U version, you can download the PowerPoint through the U version if you go through that. If you want these graphs and stuff like that. The Magi were respected priestly advisors. They were kingmakers. They were dream interpreters. They had advised dynasties for hundreds of years. We first met, you probably remember, as we did the book of Daniel, we first met 600 years ago, the Magi, as we talked about Daniel, who was kidnapped, taken hostage by the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, captured, taken to his superpower fortress, put in a cultural re-education program to turn him into a Babylonian, to teach him the Babylonian ways. But somehow, and this is why we studied the book of Daniel, because Daniel was able to remain faithful to his faith, at the same time living within the clothing and the culture of the Babylonian Empire. I think that's super important for us today, because we're asked to do the same thing. We spent a whole year talking about that, so I'm not going to go into that now. But anyway, he was able to remain a faithful Jew within the midst of all of this. Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember, had this terrible dream, woke him up, terribly disturbed him so badly, he wouldn't even let the Magi know what the dream was, because he really wanted them to tell him not only the dream, but its interpretation at the same time. Daniel was brought forward at that point. and told the king his dream and its interpretation. The king was so impressed. Daniel chapter 2 says, then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, which is amazing, and the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon, all the magi. He was the chief prefect. That's a pretty big deal. That's like, for us, that would be like asking a Buddhist to come and be your pastor. That's like someone from a completely different, like, wow, that's a completely different paradigm. The Magi were a priestly class, kind of like Levites, class of people. Many were what would become much later after this, Zoroastrians, which is interesting because it's a monotheistic religion that comes out of the polytheism of the Middle East. Very, I think, influenced by the monotheism of Judaism, and Daniel's role comes out of Iran 400 years later. It's developed by that, but again, it's a schism of it off and becomes its own thing. It still exists today, but not in the way it did become the major religion of that part of the world for a very long time. But under Daniel's leadership, they gained appreciation for the prophets, the Jewish prophets, and for Jewish scriptures. And he shaped the ways of the Magi. So these men, whether or not they were Jews, and I have very strong suspicion because there was a huge Jewish population still in Babylon at this time, maybe upwards of 1 million people at that point. But he shaped the culture of these prophets and Magi at the time. But in the book of Daniel, we read that he had his other visions, which taught us about the rise and the fall of many empires. But it also taught us that there would be a Messiah that would come, and specifically even gives a time frame that the Messiah would come from, specifically 483 years from the time that the proclamation was made to rebuild the temple. And so there was a date that was known to this whole class of people, not just the Jewish prophets, not just to Daniel, but to this whole class of people who study the stars, and they looking at prophecies from they were gathering information from all of the wise cultures of the world. And they knew this, and they had a very respected leader in Daniel that they put credence in this. So they had an expectation of that was to come. And so if they were paying attention, they would know. So today, Parthia, the land that is there, is included in modern day Iran and Iraq. Still, amazingly enough, under the Iranian after the Islamic Revolution, still has the largest population of Jews in the Middle East outside of Israel. But before the revolution, there was as many as 10 times as many Jews living there as there are today. Huge Jewish population, because Nebuchadnezzar took them there. It's just physical proof of a historic reality that Scripture talks about. So some of them did come back and rebuild Judea, but many of them got comfortable in Babylon. That's what we do, right? We get comfortable in Babylon. And so they are there. So, and also in Jesus's day, there remained a very large population in Parthia as they were. So if people are paying attention again, 483 years after this proclamation was made, there would be a sign. But what would be the sign of the coming Messiah? We also have that among those Jewish prophets. Remember Balaam? Balaam, the guy with the donkey, the talking donkey that came along. Balaam was also an Eastern Gentile prophet in the time of Moses. So Daniel is 600 years before Jesus. Balaam is 1,500 years before Jesus. So we don't even have a Pentateuch at that time. Moses is still writing when all of this stuff happens, because the Hebrews are still wandering through the desert. And as they're wandering, this pagan king wants them to be cursed by God. And so they called Balaam, who's a prophet, who comes along and he tries to curse them, but God won't allow him to curse them. And in the midst of his prophecy, in Numbers chapter 24, verse 15 through 17, it says, the Lord says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall arise out of Israel. Now remember, the Magi were big into stars. They're big into those kinds of things. So the star means something to them. And the prophecy says a star and a scepter, both symbols of authority and kings. A king was going to come out of this place called Judea, which is a very small province. It never was big. Still to this day is not a big place, although they hold a bigger place and popular attention these days and in the news than they are as a nation and as a people. But someone was going to rise out of Jacob or Israel, which would later be called Judah. So again, 483 years later, a group of magi in Babylon were paying attention to the prophecies, several prophecies that they've been made aware of, been paying attention to the stars, and they realized that something in the stars was to set them on a journey. And so they head to Judah, but there's a problem. The throne of Judah is not empty. So Matthew continues. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king. So Herod was already on the throne, and you need to understand something that historically happened that's not recorded in the scriptures, is that decades before this, when Herod first was establishing his control over this region, another group of Parthians, possibly Magi, and remember, Parthia is a rival empire. Herod is trying to establish this area under the authority of Rome because they're right on the borderlands and it would be very easy to go back and forth. And he's already thrown his cards in with the Roman Empire, but this other empire comes in, people, representatives of authority come in, and they traveled to Judea and they crowned a Jewish guy, Maccabean priest. His name was Antigonus II, as both king and high priest of Judea. Well, guess what? Herod didn't like that plan very much. So he kills Antigonus. And so they had already left at that point. So this has already happened. They'd already come to crown a king, a rival empire crowning a king. It's kind of, again, like what's happening in Venezuela, right? The Venezuelan government has someone, they say it, and then a rival empire comes in and says, we are going to put another king. It's kind of that kind of politics happening at the time. But Herod's still there. And Herod's like, no, this, you can imagine when this group of guys come in, not again. We can't have this happening. So he's already coming in. He's so paranoid. He kills his own children and his wife. His wife is best friends with Cleopatra and Anthony. His wife is best friends from her. She never liked Herod, but she was forced into this marriage because Herod was not born the king of the Jews. In fact, he wasn't even Jewish. He was a Jewish convert from the Edomite Empire. He converted for political reasons so that he could be qualified to be their king. He convinced Rome he could be their king. He married a Judean princess, sister of the guy he killed previously, by the way. And so, by the way, it's so the story is funny, but she and Cleopatra conspired to kill him, and he conspired to kill her. And there's all this. It'd be a great TV show. I'm surprised nobody's done it. Cleopatra conspired with Herod's wife to kill. Yes. Her name was Miriam. So yeah. So there's drama. There's tons of drama. So in the midst of the drama and people dying all over the place, another group of magi comes to crown another king born to be king. Not one who's going to steal it, not one, but someone who's born to be the king of Jews. That has authority to a guy who's loosely holding on to this throne in the first place. That makes sense? You can see the tension that's there. You can feel the tension in the room when they walk in and they have to go. But they're assuming that if he's born to be king, he's got to be in the palace. So that's why they go to. Plus, they better show up in Herod's palace and tell him they're about to recognize another king if he's going to be there. Now they know he's born, so he's a child. So they're not expecting the throne to be empty because a child isn't going to take the throne. A newborn isn't going to take the throne. It's in the future. So they're crowning a future king that will come from there. So he's paranoid, killing family, yes.
I've always wondered why they rat Jesus out, right?
Yeah.
But they literally thought this may have been a child in Herod's own house.
I think so. I think they came expecting that this was good news for everyone.
Oh, why didn't they thought it was?
What?
Why didn't Herod kill them?
Well, did you see in the video? He said, if we kill them, we'll never know who this guy is that we're looking for. And the people might revolt if we do that. So let's figure this. Let's let them point us to the right direction, and then we'll take care of it later. That makes sense? Yeah. So and here again, these guys show up, which is bad enough, but then they say, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where's he who was born the king of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and would come to worship. He was born. Again, Herod was not even born Jewish in the first place, let alone to be born the king of the Jews. He was a puppet ruler, and these magi from a rival imperial power come to crown another king under him that's potentially going to take away the throne from him. So when it says in verse 3, when Herod heard this, he was troubled and all Jerusalem with him. Yes, that makes sense, right? Because there's a ton of reasons why this is bad news for him. It was not an understatement. And no wonder they don't return afterwards. You don't need a vision from God to know you're not supposed to return, but clearly they know. They feared for their own lives at that point. But if the born king wasn't born in the palace, where would he be? I think that's the question they got there. I think they were just as surprised that there was this. They shouldn't be, because they're advisors to political kingdoms and power corrupts, right? And so they should understand that. So Matthew continues, verse 4. Herod assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and inquired of them where the Christ was to be born, because they should know. If they're paying attention, they should know. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are, and by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. The longer passage is in Micah chapter 5, verses 2 through 4. There's a little bit more detail there. It talks a little, you can tell it's really a messianic passage. But the important part they included, Matthew included in his gospel, is he was born in Bethlehem, Judea. If they were paying attention, they would have known that. Herod wouldn't even have had to know that. And so the priests knew exactly where to look. They looked at the prophecies of Balaam, they looked at the prophecies of Daniel, they looked at the prophecies of Micah, and they knew even the town this Messiah was to be born in. But they would not accept the truth because it might mean that they had to, guess what, release the grip of power. They'd have to let go. So now they knew the location, but they don't know how old the king is. Is he 30 years old? Was he born 30 years ago? Was he 10 years ago or whatever? And then Herod, verse 7 says, Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. So two things there. First of all, underline what time the star appeared, because we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. The other part is secret. He pulls those wise men aside from his advisors and his group to find out secretly, hey, what time did this star appear, so that he can begin to calculate how old this child was and stuff like this. This person was that was born, because I think he doesn't want them to get to this king before him and maybe cause an uprising and make him king on the other. That's how paranoid this guy is. He is so paranoid everywhere he does this. So anyway, verse 8, and he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. And after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose. It was interesting, because during the time that they were with Herod, the star was not visible. This is again part of why it makes me think this is something more than just a star in the sky. And maybe there was a transition at this point between the physical star and the supernatural star that happens. Maybe that's what happens. I don't know, but it's for some reason when they're with Herod, because otherwise, why would they say, see, look here, if you look up there, that says that a child's going to, they could have pointed that out, but they did, because it wasn't visible. But when they leave him, it rises up again and it starts leading them to Bethlehem. When it rose, I went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. Verse 10 says, and when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. It comes back. The star comes back. They had missed it. There was like, oh no, did we miss it? But it comes back after they leave Herod. Verse 11, and going into the what? The house. It doesn't say they went into the cabin, the cave, the inn, the barn. It says that he went into a house, not a manger. They saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasure, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And they were being warned in a dream not to return to Herod. They departed to their own country on the way. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child and destroy him. Now, if you just see this passage, you may not notice that there's a period of time between the birth of the child and what is going on here. You could put the wise men and the killing of the innocents there, but then the other gospels don't make sense because we know that they had to take him to the temple to have him circumcised on the 8th day, January 1st. Remember, we talked about that last week. They had to take him to the temple to be dedicated, and that had to happen. And then Anna and Simon, those prophecies. There's other things that happen in this period of time that those don't make sense. If the night that Jesus was born, they had to escape to Egypt quickly because Herod was on their tail to kill all the children in Bethlehem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So you got it. It's the same thing with our calendar. Those life of Jesus is being squished into a year. The life of or the nativity of Jesus is being squished into an evening, and it really should be several years. Same kind of thing. Yes.
Why, I know Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem for the census, why are they still there that much later?
Yeah, that is never explained. Again, maybe
Get family there?
he did have family there. Joseph had family there, and maybe while the baby was young, they decided to stay around for a while, and business got good, and so
So
The
if he had
angel
gone
told him,
back in Bethlehem.
yeah.
the angel told him
It's
to
strange.
go there. No, he didn't. The angel didn't tell him, but when he went there, he
The census. Yeah.
the angel told him to leave.
Oh, there was shame in the
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's a possibility too.
What?
There was shame back in their hometown. Maybe if they got into Nazareth right away. Now they do go there by the time Jesus is 12 or 13 years old. They end up back up in that area. And so maybe the shame is gone and her parents are still there.
Mhm.
I don't know. Some reason they do go back. There's enough reason for them to go back. Maybe it was far enough outside. By the time Herod dies, his empire is broken into smaller kingdoms. And there's one of his sons is up ruler there. So it's under a different political power at that point. It wasn't at this point, it was all one. So maybe it made it safe for them to go up and safer than being close to Jerusalem. So
Isn't there I remember years ago, there was something called the Star of Bethlehem, and they were a bunch of scientists, astronomers that explained that there was actually a sighting of a star, and they take it back to them, and then they're not far.
yeah. So there is also a thing called the Gospel in the Zodiac. That the Zodiac is so old, no one really knows like where all what a Cancer and the Sagittarius, where all that came from, and the minor houses and major houses and stuff like that. But there is a theory out there that the gospel can be explained in the Zodiac, and that it was a part of this Zodiac thing that happened, which would have fit with the Zoroastrians and also with the Magi at the time. That's what they did. So that could be a little bit happened. I actually, probably 15 years ago, did a gospel in the Zodiac thing for Christmas Eve, but we looked at the stars, the actual stars and stuff like that. Maybe I'll do it. So it is very interesting. Whether or not it's true, I don't know. But it is very interesting to me that there's a common story of the Zodiac throughout history and the stuff that's there, but nobody knows where it came from. So
Bethlehem was the place where they raised the sheep for the sacrifices in the temple. too.
Yep. And there's all kinds of stuff that goes with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the slaughtering.
Yeah.
And the.
Yeah.
What they did for the perfect lamb.
Yep. Okay, so I think I left it at verse 13. Now, when they departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." And he arose and took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, "Out of Egypt I will call my son." Then Herod, when he had seen that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious and sent and killed all the male children of Bethlehem and all that region who were 2 years or under. Here's the other part of that, what we mentioned before, according to the time that had been ascertained by the wise men. So that's why we're like, we have a 2-year time frame. We just don't have the nights The night doesn't work chronologically. A 2-year time frame fits much better with what's going on. 2 years and under, and they're in a house. That's accurate. So they moved from the barn. They weren't living for 2 years in the cave. They all lived in caves by then. So the fact that there are lots of caves that people lived in regularly, and they even carved out caves. The stonework, or the stone, it's a soapstone that's very soft, and in the heat that's there, when you carve out into the temperature stays the same. So they would keep their animals in these caves. They would put storage rooms down there. They would raise doves down there. When we go, we typically go to a place where we do a dig in an underground city that they would hide from Roman soldiers and stuff like that. Cover the doors like hobbits, and they connect miles worth of houses and stuff like that through these areas that go through there.
Did we not see some of them when we were coming down Mount Arbel, I think it's called?
There were, yes, those were natural caves. Those weren't.
Oh,
carved
they were
caves.
not carved. Okay.
The interesting thing about the city that I'm talking about is actually the city where Herod was born.
Got it.
It was part of an Edomite gathering, and the whole town converted to Judaism, but it's an underground city that has all these huge tunnels. And when you hear about David's army of hundreds of men hiding in the caves, you understand that they're big places, but they were able to carve their housing into the caves. But it says they lived in a house, not in a cave. They very easily could have said that like that. So both clues, both of those, the house and under 2 years, are clues that the Magi didn't meet Jesus for a couple years after he was born. Again, plus he had to go to the temple in 8 days to be dedicated. So there was at least a week that was in there. So much more than that. All those things happened. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping out and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they were no more. So now what? The prophecies of the 483 years till the coming of the Messiah had become folk stories. Yeah, the Messiah is not going to come. Maybe he's going to spiritually come. Remember at the beginning of the video, one of the Magi actually said, "You're going on a spiritual journey, right? You're not actually going to go to Judea." That's the kind of things. It's kind of like around Christmas time for us. The whole, Jesus being born gets lined up with Santa Claus and Elf on the Shelf and all those other things that are there. Which is why we decided as a family it was important to separate those things, because you don't want to confuse kids about. It's hard enough for us as adults to distinguish between the mythology and the storytelling and the magic, and then that's good, but Jesus is real, and his birth was real and had a very real consequences for us, and so you have to be careful about that. And so this is a great past. Yes.
Well, I sorry to interrupt you, but I was the first song we had in the first set, you said there was something you wanted to talk about before as a teachable moment, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, are you still going to do that, or?
Well, yeah, I did. So the wise men came to the manger.
Okay.
They didn't. And so the shepherds did, because the shepherds went, the angels told the shepherds and they went straight from the field, right?
Okay.
The Magi didn't do that.
So, okay, well, then why did you play the song if you knew there was?
Because it's a great song and does have some great visuals
Okay.
behind it.
Okay. I'm just curious. Thank you.
It is very difficult even a lot of our Christmas carols that we sing today are connect the wise men with the manger scene. And so it's hard to even have a song, let alone a video, that doesn't include that today. If you look at the 3 or 4 Christmas movies that came out this year with the birth of Jesus, the Magi are always a part of them. Even that we know there's good education about it, the mythology is so big that people just, let's just go with that.
All the activities.
Yeah, and then nativity. So typically, we have wise men in our nativity today. We usually hold them back until after Christmas.
Put it further away.
Yeah. You're not actually supposed to put baby Jesus in there till Christmas Eve either, but most people put baby Jesus in there. So, yeah. All right. So this is a great passage for the beginning of the year, because Herod was threatened by this new king that came along. The priests who led the temple, the worship, they were threatened by this new king. And so the question for each of us as we go into the new year, are we threatened by the authority of Jesus in our lives, being king in our lives? Again, we probably all at some point or another said, no, you're the Lord of my life. I give you all of me, and yet again, we've been slowly crawling back onto the throne itself. If Jesus is king, then I am not. And too often we're trying to hold on to our power and authority. And maybe we've given him all of us, except that, or that piece, or that part of it. And so that's the thing as we go into a brand new year. It's a brand new opportunity to look at this year. I want to give Jesus all of it. Right? Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for a great conversation about your word and your gift to us in Jesus, and even this visit of these wise men who were no accident of history. They say so much to us if we will listen. Give us the courage to listen and obey. In Jesus' name, amen.